Great, come on up, ChristchurchNZ.
Thank you, Morena. I'm happy to introduce this review of ChristchurchNZ's impact during the third quarter. You'll shortly see a presentation from Ali. Where the key take-outs are that the organisation's on track to deliver and in many cases significantly overachieve on both its levels of service and organisational KPIs. We've had a discussion about that as a board, and we're aligned with management that a lot of this overachievement gives us an opportunity to really significantly increase these metrics over future years. And you'll see this reflected, more ambitious targets reflected in the final statement of intent. I also wanted to note that when I came in here last year and addressed you, we talked a little bit about how we're focused on attracting new sources of third-party funding. This is both to amplify the impact of the funding received from you as a shareholder, and also obviously reduce our reliance on ratepayer funding. So we've had some notable wins in that area during the quarter, in particular 600k of funding from central government for the Australian Visitation Campaign, and just last week the announcement of NZ major events funding towards Supercars Christchurch, as we're hosting Supercars from 2026 in a multi-year deal, which, as you know, was brokered by ChristchurchNZ with support of Council, the Canterbury Car Club and central government. This is only the second time actually that Christchurch has received New Zealand major events investment, and we're hoping this is the beginning of it on ship. So we hope to continue to grow as events in the city reach a new level. Obviously that's not just a win for tourism and retail and hospitality, but also gives us the opportunity to showcase the incredible innovation and technology in Christchurch, and it's the beginning as we begin to work with Supercars on how we might look at those opportunities to develop and highlight future tech in the city, as we have done in the past with the Super Sprint and launching the world's first hydrogen drift car. So Q3, as it always is, was a massive quarter for major events, with Electric Avenue obviously smashing records for visitor spend. And while we're talking about events, I think it's important to make councillors aware that there are more opportunities right now to attract events to the city than there is funding available. There's a lot more to discuss, so I'll hand it over to Ali and she's going to take you through the highlights.
Awesome. All right, so let's start with the numbers. If we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So we have 9 levels of service agreed with yourselves for the year, and at the end of quarter 3, we're on track to meet all of them. I've just chosen a few as selected highlights here. By the end of March, we've already hosted 68 FAMILs, or trade engagement, showcasing the city to trade agents, investors and media. The kind of coverage we get from things like this, you may have seen there was a really beautiful piece from Jesse Mulligan about Akaroa being a great place for families. That came directly out of a FAMIL we did with him, so that's the kind of coverage that we get as a result of that. We provided support for 633 businesses, which means we're well on track to achieve our target of 800. And we've made 47 bids for business events, which surpasses our annual target already by more than 50%. Some of that is partly because of the delays to the Auckland Convention Centre, meaning that we're picking up some of that. That will get much tougher in the coming years, but it's been a really good year for business events already. Turning to our 5 internal KPIs, these are the same numbers that you would have seen at what seems like the very recent quarter 2 report, because we only measure our KPIs on a 6-month or annual basis. There's a lot of work goes behind these in order to make sure they meet our auditors' requirements. But we have already delivered 680 long-lasting jobs, driven again largely by the Engine Centre. No, that one, this one, please. Yeah. Largely driven by the Engine Centre and the Bio-Aura work, but also other parts have contributed to that. And we've already exceeded our GDP target by almost double. And on that metric alone, actually, apologies, sorry, we've exceeded the investment into the city target by a factor of almost 8. And on that metric alone, we've achieved an ROI of $17.36 for every dollar of council funding. And I just wanted to touch again on the KPIs that we haven't yet reached. At the 6-month mark, we're just short of halfway towards the KPI for visitor spend and short-term job creation. But as Lauren mentioned, quarter 3 is always a big major events quarter, and that's the activity that mostly delivers to those metrics. So we're very confident that we will be able to hit those by the end of the year. If you could move on to the next slide now. Now, I'm not going to talk to this. I just want to say that behind the KPIs and levels of service, there's a lot of delivery activity. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some of the highlights from each of our outcomes in a moment, but I don't want to overlook the breadth of what we do over the past quarter and indeed in every quarter. So this is a snapshot of some of the delivery that happens within our innovation and business growth and our urban development teams. And if you could go to the next slide, this shows you some of the delivery from our destination and attraction and our marketing teams. So there's a lot going on. This is just in one quarter. It's a very broad range of activity that we cover. Rather than take you through all of that in detail, you can read about a lot of that in the report. What I thought would be really good was actually just to take you through a couple of highlights. So let's start with productivity. And the productivity, a lot of that is linked to the work that Martin Cudd does. So in the innovation and business growth team. So we made him very happy by putting a picture of him up here. He'll be very disappointed by that, I'm sure. So in early February, ChristchurchNZ hosted a delegation of 75 investors and entrepreneurs, including 35 prominent tech founders, engineers, executives and investors from Silicon Valley. I can honestly say I've never been in the presence of more wealth than on this particular trip. It was slightly terrifying. The Far Out 4x4 convoy was led by Chester Ventures, their founder, Rob Conybeare. And it's a group of venture capitalists who travel from Auckland to Queenstown in a fleet of 22 four-wheel drive vehicles over 9 days, meeting high-tech startup founders and entrepreneurs along the way. And Otatahi was the only city where they spent 2 nights, and that included a visit to the Tāwhaki National Aerospace Centre at Kaiteriti, before a dinner connecting them to 50 members of the city's innovation and investment ecosystem. And several promising international investment connections were made, and local companies have shared really positive feedback on the event's success. I also just want to highlight, before I move on from productivity, that this quarter we also signed a 3-year collaborative MOU with Christchurch Educated. That's to focus on growing the international student market in the city, helping to mitigate the scaled back presence and the role of Education New Zealand. That will help the city to reclaim its 12% national share of the international education market, up from the current 10%. And based on 2023 data, achieving that goal, getting that 2% back, could generate up to $400 million annually for the local economy. So it's well worth putting in the time. Moving on to livability. Our first highlight is the progress at Sydenham Yard, which is the former City Care Depot on Milton Street. So negotiations through the conditional period for the Sydenham Yard residential development were progressed in quarter 3, with agreement reached around key aspects of the development intent requirements. That included completion of additional ground contamination and geotech investigations, agreement on concept and staging plans, agreement on the criteria and detail of affordable housing to be included in the development, and development of a placemaking strategy to connect new residents with the existing community. And of course, if I can jump forward to, obviously it wasn't in quarter 3, but just yesterday we were able to announce that Fletcher Living is the developer for the residential part of the development, and work on site is expected to begin early next year once the necessary consents are secured. That'll be close to 80 2- and 3-bedroom homes, at least 11 of which will meet agreed criteria for affordability. Which is great, because I didn't think that was going to happen. No, it was a real challenge. Yeah. So it was quite a journey. And the terrace-style homes will be built sustainably with connections to the neighbouring Sydenham Park, local shops and public transport, and we'll continue to monitor key contractual requirements and support the development work as it progresses. We also reached a key milestone in New Brighton in quarter 3 with the site blessing and opening of the first stage of the Tupaku Maru on Beresford Street. And the first homeowners welcome to the property. It was lovely to be able to see them get the keys. This family was the first to move in the under the Ministry of Pacific Peoples funded Progressive Home Ownership Initiative. And the Minister for Pacific Peoples, Shane Retty, attended along with members of the wider community. Work is progressing well on stage 2 and 3 of the 63 home development that will bring people and life to the commercial centre of New Brighton. And our final highlight here is the community-led Village Green project in New Brighton, funded by the Christchurch Regeneration Acceleration Facility. That's a mouthful. This project received resource consent in quarter 3 and is now working through tenders for construction, with work to start in the coming months. And moving on to attractiveness. Between January and March 2025, the major events summer portfolio delivered really exceptional results for the city. I try hard not to use adjectives in these presentations, but it's quite hard not to when we're talking about this. Through the council's events ecosystem fund, the city, through ChristchurchNZ, invested in 7 major events, which cumulatively attracted an estimated 96,000 attendees. Those events generated an estimated 78,000 visitor nights and 13.25 million in visitor spending in the local economy. And of course, the major highlight was Electric Ave, where ChristchurchNZ supported Team Event, the producers of the festival, to secure 2 major international headline acts and expand the festival from 1 to 2 days in celebration of its 10th anniversary. And that strategic move delivered the highest economic impact Christchurch has seen from a major event in at least a decade, with Electric Avenue now officially the biggest music event in Australasia, resulting in 63,000 visitor nights alone and a visitor spend of 10.5 million. So Electric Avenue didn't just bring that money in, but it actually really enforced Christchurch's capability and reputation to host large-scale multi-day international events, much like SailGP did for us a couple of years ago, and has really been a platform for us being able to get things like supercars. In January, of course, the World Buskers Festival returned for its 33rd year under new management by Hoo Ha Productions, and with a return to its original name, the event underwent a complete rebrand, featuring a fresh new look and feel, crafted by a local agency and strongly linked to the city identity. That's really spooky. I don't ever want to hear it again. Yeah. So post-event survey results for the buskers showed strong support for the rebrand, with 77% of respondents describing the new look and feel as fun and playful, and 72% agreeing that it captured the essence of the festival. And the festival continued to strengthen the arts capability here in Christchurch, with a focus on growing and developing Māori and Pacifica curator and mentor programs that helped local performers reach international standards, and collaboration with local circus and performance groups enhanced their capabilities and aligned with plans to activate new venues in Christchurch, such as the beautiful New Court Theatre and Parakiori Recreation and Sports Centre. The festival featured 107 artists across 55 ticketed shows and 284 buskers shows, and attracted just under 100,000 total attendees. And 95% of resident attendees agreed that hosting events like this make Christchurch a much better place to live. And then finally, I've touched on it earlier, but I'll just mention it again. Business events, 6 city-led bids to host business events were won in Q3. Just to get an understanding, we to achieve our levels of service target, we want to be winning at least 3 a quarter. So to hit 6 is quite remarkable. And they're expected to bring 3,300 plus delegates to the city and a total visitor spend of 6 million. And in total, submitted bids for the year to date have the potential to attract 20,000 delegates and bring $30 million worth of visitor spend versus a target of 13.6. So that shows you just how well that particular area of our work is going at the moment. All right, moving on to the financial results for our Q3 financial position. The year-to-date surplus is 981k. This is higher than budgeted, largely due to additional commercial revenue of 468,000 negotiated by ChristchurchNZ. And it will be spent on relevant contracts in Q4. It includes things like the third-party screen grant enhancement that I talked about last quarter, central government funding for buskers, Selwyn, Huranui, the airport, Tourism New Zealand contributing to campaigns and events. Operating expenditure is largely on track with some timing variances. And year-on-year income and expenditure variance is related to reduced central government COVID recovery funding, which does also impact the non-shareholder funding percentage. We do, as Lauren already mentioned, continue to focus really strongly on getting that third-party funding in to enhance and, where possible, replace the funding that we get from council. And finally, just before I wrap up, I just want to move on to some of the key activity coming before the end of the year. So just to update you, Aura is making really strong progress towards its goal of delivering CAR-T cancer therapy to New Zealanders. The phase 2 clinical trial is advancing well, and patient access is now expanded beyond Wellington to include Auckland and Christchurch. So Christchurch residents are already benefiting from this, which is fantastic. ChristchurchNZ continues to support BioAura through its commercial negotiations. They're progressing really positively, and in parallel, work is ongoing to assist the company with its Series A investment round, helping to position BioAura for long-term growth and impact in the health innovation sector. The Waitaha Canterbury Aerospace Strategy is nearing completion. We've got a final version due to be signed off and officially launched by the end of June. That's been built by the Canterbury Aerospace Leadership Group, which Councillor Barber sits on to represent council. And the strategy has also been officially supported by the Canterbury Mayoral Forum. The strategy also nests within the wider government strategy, so it fits really neatly in the central government strategy, and that puts us in a really good position to grow the sector. And we're now moving into implementation in partnership with other stakeholders. On the economic ambition, city decision makers, industry leaders, council representatives and innovators gathered at a workshop in early April to help shape the city's journey to a regenerative economy. Again, it was great to have council represented as part of this kaupapa. The ambition, as you know, sets a long-term goal for the city, and by bringing together partners from across industries and sectors, we can identify the missions or the transition challenges that will help to make it a reality. This was the first of a series of workshops, and over the remainder of Q4, we'll work as an ecosystem to identify key areas that we can make a difference. Last couple, in February, we secured 600,000 for central government in a contestable fund to help boost the region. That was on behalf of the city, Horonui, West Coast and Kaikoura, Timaru and Mackenzie. And that funding is to create a winter marketing campaign called Winter Different to drive visitation specifically from the East Coast of Australia. We partnered with Webjet to help get flights and Snap Rental in terms of cars to entice bookings and ensure a really seamless experience. And there are also more than 100 regional winter deal offers from local tourism operators. Launched in mid-May, it's got an incredibly ambitious KPI from central government to drive an additional 6,000 visitors from Australia to Christchurch or to the region between June and September 2025. If we hit that, we'll be remarkable. So it's been a very fast turnaround. And then finally, a couple of things from our destination management plan. First of all, food tourism is one of the strongest drivers of visitation, particularly in our key markets of the US and Australia. And we're engaging with the food and beverage sectors across the region to create a provenance strategy. That will help to drive culinary identity, build a local food and beverage story, guide ongoing culinary product development, local procurement experiences and events, and will be presented to council on its completion in Q1 next year. And finally, we're undertaking technical work to develop Banks Peninsula as a dark sky destination. That's particularly interesting for Akaroa because it has a seasonal benefit. Stargazing is better in winter, and it's really great that we'll be able to get people there in the off season. So look, that's a lot. I'm really conscious that's a big download. It's a big quarter for us. I think you can see it. There's a bit of creaking at the seams, but it's been a real joy to see such wonderful things, and hopefully, you'll see some of the coverage even in the newspaper today. So.
Great, thank you both very much for that. I've got a couple of questions. Tyrone and then Tim, Yanni and Andre.
Sally, you were talking about the Banks Peninsula visitor economy. So great, stellar performance, surplus. I love that surplus. So will that enable the funding of a dedicated resource that supports the development and implementation of, I better read this, a place-based visitor economy growth strategy for Akaroa and the surrounding districts, just a single dedicated person for that? Either contracted or in-house?
So when I say we have surplus, that's a timing issue rather than we have more money than we need issue. It's fair to say that in some parts of our business at the moment, we're operating at pretty close to minimal viable product. So tourism and destination management would be one of those. And we can, I can't remember who, it's always Mark Twain or Winston Churchill that are credited with every quote ever, but we've got no money, so we really have to think. It's definitely true. I mean, I think it's good. It really focuses on very tight return on investment. So, pardon?
That was Gandhi.
That was Gandhi. Yeah, he gets a bit of credit for something.
Yeah. That's Simpson.
So I think there's two answers to that. One is Akaroa is always going to be, and the Banks Peninsula is always going to be a really important part of our destination story. It is a jewel in the crown of this region. And for certain types of activity and visitors, it's something that we're always going to use to lead with. So are we going to have a specific person dealing with it? I think that's unlikely. It's not our job as a regional development agency to move ratepayer monies around the Christchurch district region. So get people from Christchurch into Akaroa, or that's not something that we currently do. We're bringing people into the region. And to do that, then Akaroa and Banks Peninsula is always going to be a lead. And we do very, very tight work to make sure that whenever we do for mills, that we deliver a lot in that space. So
Because the challenge that we've got at the moment is we've got all this potential and all this, you know, anything, but there's just not the people, I mean, it's all volunteer done, and there's just not a cohesive strategy to pull it all together into that growth strategy to grow that visitor economy, and that's just so we're kind of missing out on an opportunity, I think.
Yeah, look, understand, I sat on Akaroa District Promotions in a life, so I understand that it's a challenge. Look, I'm really happy to have an offline conversation about this with you. About you. Yeah, that's right, that's a really bad Freudian slip, yeah. Talk about Tyrone offline.
Right in front of him.
Tim, and then Yanni and Andre.
I just actually want to thank you and your board and your team with regards to Milton Street. The photo you've got there shows why it's so valuable. You know, seems so many years ago, I stood there with the board, DCL, and here we are. So please pass on my personal thanks to your board and your team for their vision and understanding how important this is. So thank you.
That's right.
Great, Yanni, Andre, then Celeste, and then we're going to move on.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the work that you've been doing. I guess I was just quite interested in getting a little bit more detail about some of the projects that you've been involved with. So, for example, the New Brighton housing is at what stage would we kind of get a sense of the value of the investment or the facilitation that we've done versus, you know, what that looks like in terms of both economic and well-being? Like, is there a way that we could understand what the costs were to be involved versus the benefits and the outcomes that we're getting at what point? Because I see the Fletcher's development as well, and it seems like that New Brighton development's a really good model for getting affordable and first-time home ownership, possibly, but I just don't know enough about the economic equation, or, you know, and I was quite surprised that with 63 houses, that only five were for first-time home ownership, but there may be reasons behind that in terms of the economics. So is there a way that, so at what point can we be in a position to better understand the benefits of the investment or the work and what the ultimate results are for that development?
So one of the things we talk about a lot at ChristchurchNZ is that we're an intervention agency. We should only get involved when there's a market failure or a market opportunity that isn't going to be picked up by the private sector or by someone else, because we don't want to get in people's way. We are here to actually just do things that are for the good of the city on behalf of you as our shareholder that other people wouldn't do. New Brighton was a great example of that. So, and it was not just the housing, it was putting in the hot pools, which was great vision by you guys, the Marine Parade redevelopment, and then all of that together starts to get enough footfall and traffic around New Brighton to be able to get a private sector like Martini to come in and invest. So that means that we're getting close to the end of our intervention at New Brighton, because actually the momentum has got to a point where we can start to pull back. We are at the moment pulling together the New Brighton work as a bit of a case study, because it is a really nice blueprint, I think, and a really great example of the community council, ChristchurchNZ, and the private sector working together to be able to generate really good outcomes that are in the best interest of the community, still economically viable, really socially just and economically inclusive. So I think it's a really good example, and at some point we will come back and present that to council.
Okay, so so we'll go to Andre and then Celeste, and then if there's time, Yanni will come back. Andre?
Are you aware that there's this poll on stuff today asking where you'd rather be, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch? Christchurch, 84%.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And is that on
On stuff.
Yeah, nice, it's on both. So it's on both.
Talk about bursting a balloon, geez.
That's Penny's amazing.
Okay, cool. So they are aware now, so we'll move.
I'm just building on Yanni's comment around the housing, and just want to acknowledge the work done in that space. And it would be good to, maybe as part of the report back about what's being done in that area and how it is a model. Could we get a bit more information? Maybe it might be from Annie and her team who delivered that project, about, you know, what are some of the principles behind that, because I think it would be quite interesting for council to hear that.
Yeah, great.
And I just want to also acknowledge that we've got a $40 million housing development also happening in Seaview, which is the old school, and that's actually, originally that project was led by Christchurch DCL. So that's another big investment into the area, which is really delivering. So it's all kind of coming together now, but driven in large part by ChristchurchNZ and their team. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Cool. All right, so let's happy to move this. Mark's happy to second it. All in favour? Against, that's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Sorry, wrong one. Item 11, discretionary response fund. Yeah.
We have subcategories by the most popular destinations.
Oh, yeah.
We know that Sumner Beach does.
Okay, so